We are back with Stephen Horn, who is this guy from the Capitol, right, Stephen? We can confirm this. The FBI's photo of
Yes.
you. Okay.
Yes.
All right. So we know that they're at least telling truth about that. You finally have a trial date set. You have not been in prison like some other of the January 6th defendants. You have been a free man waiting for this. But I guess first question. So your trial date set for the day after my birthday. So I'll have to celebrate, I guess, by doing something covering. And it's the day before my son's birthday. I don't know. It's kind of interesting coincidence. So we'll be paying close attention. And they have set this date. What is this now? A year and a half after. I guess my first question for
I mean,
you
it's
is
been
what
it's been over 2 years.
over 2 years, yeah. So yeah, what? Sorry, my brain is not totally working. What do you think about that?
I mean, for most of that period, we were willing to continue to push the date out. The government was willing to continue to push the date out. But, after he sent this letter to the sort of internal office that determines whether or not, a particular individual who the DOJ is looking into or prosecuting will be treated under their rules for members of the news media, after he sent a letter to that office, with information that I was a journalist, asked them to reconsider. Then, sort of the next hearing, the government comes back and is like, we don't want to delay anymore. We want to go to trial as soon as we can.
Hmm. Okay. So one of the more interesting pieces of your case is that you have said you were there covering this as a journalist, and so it obviously brings to the forefront how the federal government chooses to define a journalist. Obviously, there were a lot of journalists there that day who have not been charged by the FBI. So the question here is, why you? Why are you being charged when you say you're a journalist, just like the ones who've said I'm a journalist and haven't been charged? Let's talk a little bit about that. From your standpoint at this point, like what have you learned, I guess, about why they say, no, we're charging you versus these other people? And how do they define a journalist?
Well, what we have learned is that the Department of Justice is not too interested in being transparent in how they make that determination. I don't believe we've ever gotten a clear answer on how they determined which the journalists, who are present on the grounds, with the journalists who went into the Capitol to charge, and which ones not to charge. As you are mentioning, there are lots of journalists, even not just journalists who were, outside covering the rioting, the unrest that was going on outside, but journalists who entered the Capitol with the crowd, like I did. I have the names of like 26 journalists that I've compiled, possibly up to 70 journalists, I've heard other people say, who entered the Capitol with the crowd. And obviously, the vast majority of those have not been charged with any crimes.
All right. So going to this article exclusive, January 6th journalist headed to trial in landmark press freedom case. Here you are. This by Ken Silva for headlineusa.com. Horn provided examples of his earlier work, as well as reference letters, emails, and other records supporting his claim to being a legitimate journalist and not the pro Trump activist that the government has portrayed him as. When you've submitted earlier work, reference letters, emails, can you give me some examples of what you've tried to do to prove your case?
Yeah, so basically, there's an internal office in the Department of Justice called the PSEU. I forget exactly what it stands for. I believe it's the Policy and Statutes Enforcement Unit. So when my lawyer was talking to the government's lawyer, uh, they were like, okay, well, you can send a letter to this department. They're the ones who make the decision. We, as the attorneys prosecuting the case, can't make this decision. So we put together this letter, and so basically, it was as much evidence and stuff I could put together of journalism that I had done prior to January 6th. So and basically, I started publishing independent journalism in the summer of 2020. Covering some of the riots and demonstrations that were going on locally to me here in North Carolina. Mainly in Raleigh. We had some riots, some Antifa, some Black Lives Matter stuff. So that was the independent journalism I had done, but I had also worked on several, sort of journalism or media related projects before. I had worked on a 21-hour documentary series on the Civil War when I was a teenager. I also worked on a project where we investigated the head of an orphanage in Nigeria who was abusing the children at the orphanage. So we were trying to expose that. That was a ministry that was funded by the US. So, I was behind the camera when we were filming interviews, trying to get that out there. So I actually had a letter from, I believe, the Nigerian Union of Journalists, basically, one of their state branches saying, hey, see him participate in this project, good work or whatever. So basically, that was some of the stuff I was able to put together. Also, a couple of sort of press credentials I had to film at some reenactments, like the 150th Gettysburg reenactment and the 200th anniversary of Waterloo.
All right, Stephen, let's talk real fast about this video that came out. I think Tucker, right, was maybe the one that broke it. January 6th footage shows Capitol cops escorting QAnon shaman to Senate floor. And if anyone has seen that video, which I'm not going to play right now, you do literally see, here it is, footage aired on Tucker Carlson's Fox News show. Of course, Tucker no longer with Fox. Shows the officers closely following Chansley as he wanders the corridors of the Capitol, bare-chested and wearing face paint and a luxuriant fur hat with Viking horns. And the quote here, virtually every moment of his time inside the Capitol was caught on tape. The tape show the Capitol Police never stopped Jacob Chansley. They helped him. They acted as his tour guides. Before I ask you about what you saw in relation to that and what you think law enforcement collusion potentially could have been on that day, don't forget, if you're watching and you want to support independent journalism, and we're going to ask Stephen too about the other independent journalists who were there that didn't, because it's not just a mainstream media thing. It wasn't like they just let NBC off the hook. There are independent journalists who have not been charged by the FBI. But don't forget, you can keep me in business, keep interviews like this going by going to AllisonWinePromo.com. The best Malbecs you've ever had from the highest regions of Argentina. These are extremist altitudes. What else pairs with a video about January 6th than an extremist altitude wine? So we'll get some wine with a cause. July 4th is coming up. I don't know if we even believe we have like independence anymore, but if you do or you don't, and you're like totally sad about it, you just want to have a glass of wine to forget about it all, this is a great wine for you. Extremist altitude, almost 9,000 feet for that one in the middle. One on the left is one of my favorite wines of all time. And the one on the right, they use natural fermentation, zero filtration. So great wines. You can get them at the grocery store. Why would you want to? AllisonWinePromo.com, 50% off the wine itself and 50% off shipping. You can also get USDA certified organic coffee by also going to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. You've got light roast. We've got dark roast. And there is also a Caturra tea. So I drink the espresso, which is that pink bottom, red bottom one on the left there every morning. I have a raw milk latte. Very good. It's a little harder to drink hot lattes in Florida because it's like living in a swamp even by 7 o'clock in the morning. But I'm going to just have to start turning them to iced lattes. Okay. So go to twinenginecoffee.com/Allison. There's also tea. If you're a tea drinker, you can do that as well. Okay. So Stephen, let's go back to talking about what I was asking you regarding not necessarily specifically Chansley, though if you want to talk about him specifically, we totally can. But I guess my interest in this relates a little bit more to the law enforcement side of this story that we were told, which is law enforcement they were just run over by everybody, and they tried so hard to protect the Capitol, but they just couldn't because these rioters or insurrectionists, whatever the story is. And then we see this video of Chansley going through the Capitol with police right around him, not trying to stop him at all. In fact, like I believe there were even parts where they were opening doors, or at least like standing there while he was going through doors and stuff. What's your take on all this?
Yeah, so this is actually something that I've focused quite a bit of research on. I'm working on a documentary that hopefully will be out very soon. It's sort of in the last stages of post-production, which is specifically focusing on that idea that the police were just run over. Basically they were completely, I guess, overwhelmed. There was nothing they could do to stop people from entering the Capitol. I think it's really untrue, and I think that the media has not done a good job of helping people understand exactly how the police defense did collapse. Because this is one of the best defended buildings in America. The Capitol Police, which are just dedicated to protecting the Capitol, performing law enforcement for the Capitol complex. They, in size, they are comparable to the police departments of some of America's largest cities. But on January 6th, there was sort of this collapse that happened a little after the riot started. So, everyone's probably seen the video from sort of the perimeter of the Capitol grounds where they're attacking the initial police line. There's just a few police there. Ray Epps is whispering in some guy's ear. That was sort of when the riot started. And the police then, there's just a few police there. They quickly retreated. But it didn't take the police very long to sort of reform a line. They had reinforcements arriving rapidly. So from that point, about 1 o'clock on, the police were actually moving their line forward. They were pushing people back. And for the next about hour, that's what was happening. The police were slowly getting reinforcements, pushing the crowd back. They were not being overwhelmed. They were not just being pushed back the whole time. They were pushing forward. They were getting reinforcements. But around 1:50, they start getting outflanked. There's a specific portion of the police line, which is on the northwest Capitol stairs, where the police start being pushed back. They start retreating. And the police are still getting reinforcements, but instead of sending reinforcements to this spot on the line where they're being pushed back, they continue to send it to the main line. So it's sort of, the police had cameras all over the Capitol. You've seen the video cameras from inside the Capitol that you were just discussing, but they also had many, many cameras outside the Capitol. And we know they're watching the cameras because in some of the recordings, you can see them manually moving the camera to point at different things, because some of the cameras were fixed and some were movable. But they did not use that tactical knowledge, being able to see everything that was happening to adequately send the reinforcements that were arriving to where they're needed. So about 2:10, the police line, where they're being pushed back up the stairs, it just completely collapses. And from then on, we do see, it's like the police defense is completely scattered. You see incidents like with Jacob Chansley, where there are a group of police officers sort of following him around as he's wandering through the Capitol. You have the West Terrace store where the police let people in. But then you also have incidents like Ashley Babbitt, where the police officer obviously used lethal force as she was entering through a window into one specific area. So it was like the police, after that portion of the line collapsed and people were able to get around and behind the main police line and, access unguarded entrances to the building where they broke in, it was like the police response was very chaotic and uncoordinated. So, you had police using force, and then you had police just sort of wandering around, standing around, watching people. So it was very discoordinated.
So I guess when it comes to the interaction that a journalist, however that is defined, has with law enforcement covering these events, were there ever any moments where you identified yourself as such while you were there?
No, I mean, from my experience, covering riots and violent demonstrations over the past 6 months or so before then, my experience had been that rioters are not too friendly to members of the media because they're aware that, as Antifa says, no face, no case. And so members of the media might be very beneficial to the public, but they're not very beneficial to rioters. So rioters tend to not look very friendly on them. One of the first demonstrations that I covered that turned into rioting, I saw a crew from the local mainstream media, WRAL. The crowd was surrounding them, attacking them, even though they had, 2 huge bodyguards there. People were still trying to throw hands at them. And so I was like, okay, I'm just by myself. The tactic I'm going to take to stay safe is to stay under the radar. So, when I was at the Capitol, I never identified myself as press. I had sort of a camera sort of covertly in my helmet, so you couldn't even really tell that I was filming. And so that was sort of my strategy to stay safe. So I didn't really ever have an opportunity, to have that sort of interaction with a police officer where I identified myself as press. When I first came to Capitol grounds, I couldn't even see any police officers. It was just, people all over the grounds.
All right, over at aliceamaro.locals.com, where you can support my work, $5 a month to go one-on-one with the most censored people on the internet and put questions ahead of time for interviews, do the reporting yourself. Let's go down to the first question. I want to know why a government building is not the appropriate place to demonstrate against those in government, whereas Target and small private businesses are. Any thoughts on that, Stephen?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly a perspective to have. Some groups had obtained permits to hold events on Capitol grounds, but those are sort of on the opposite side of Capitol grounds from sort of the ellipse and the Washington Monument where the whole crowd was coming from. So there were places on Capitol grounds that weren't fenced off and that had been reserved for protesting that people could have used to protest, but instead, most of the crowd ended up gathering on the west side of Capitol grounds, which had been fenced off earlier in the morning, and where people had gone and moved the fences and taken them away after the police had retreated.
Hmm. Okay. Let's go to the next one. At this point, is this about bankrupting you financially and morally as a public crucifixion warning to other journalists?
I
I
mean,
guess,
I would
in other
like to
words, why do you think you're being prosecuted?
I would like to think that, I'm important enough for the government to, go after me personally. But honestly, I really have no idea why they decided to come after me. I hadn't made any big splashes before January 6th that would lead me to think like, oh wow, I was on their radar and they would have some reason to come after me. So we'll see.
Okay. There was another interesting question here from Linta Drug, because I do think this brings up a good point. With the bad actors both attacking journalists, which you've mentioned, Stephen, as well as declaring themselves journalists in an effort to avoid being arrested, despite being actively engaged in criminal behavior moments before, it seems that independent journalists are stuck with two bad choices. One, wear press credentials and be very visibly distinguishable as journalists and risk being attacked by protesters, or two, go undercover and risk being arrested and charged. What are Stephen Horn's thoughts on this conundrum, and what does he think could be done to the laws to protect actual journalists while still addressing those who falsely use the freedom of the press to cover for criminal behavior?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I think it's not something that should certainly be discussed and debated in the public sphere. But I think the start of that is the government being transparent about, this is when we consider someone a journalist. This is when we're going to exercise our discretion to charge someone versus not charging someone. So basically, the state now is that often the law enforcement will sort of defer to people who identify themselves as journalists, especially if they have a powerful institution backing them up, like a local newspaper or a local TV station or national news. So even if they do end up getting swept up, when the police are sort of crowding people in, doing mass arrests, the police will often, or I guess it's the DA, will often drop the charges afterwards, because there are those First Amendment arguments that will make. But currently, the status at the federal level, especially in regards to January 6th, it seems like the Department of Justice may have criteria or they may not have criteria and just be winging it. But there is no transparency here with why they're deciding to arrest and prosecute some journalists like me who entered the Capitol and not arrest most of the journalists who entered the Capitol.
Okay. One last quick question over at Locals. It's from Snoop Dogg. I don't know what to believe about January 6th. I know it's tough. On the one hand, there's the video of the cops opening the barrier for the crowd, but there's also video of people smashing windows. And there's video of people calmly walking into the building, which makes the window smashing seem gratuitous. And there was the cop who was getting crushed in the doorway and the ex-soldier who got shot to death if she was really killed. Also, everybody knew there was an action plan. So I don't understand why there wasn't more security. All these conflicting facts make me very suspicious. Do you have any proof that this was a let it happen on purpose?
I'm generally of the opinion, I believe it's, what is it, Hanlon's razor, never attribute to malice what can be explained by stupidity. So I don't have any strong evidence that the police intentionally were doing a bad job. But the evidence does seem to point to that they could have done a much better job in stopping people. I believe with the resources the police had, if they had been deployed, in a superior tactical manner with the resources they had on hand, I believe they could have stopped people from breaking into the Capitol. I don't think they could have prevented there being a riot because there are a lot of people who are very angry. And so, to mention sort of the gratuitousness, yeah, there's a small percentage of the people there who are angry enough to break windows, and it's not like there was um, the same level of coordination, communication among the crowd to be like, oh, police, are backing up here without fighting, so let's go over here. No, you see one entrance, the police let people in; another entrance, the police are fighting people. At the tunnel under the Capitol, where, well, it's referred to as a tunnel. It's just sort of a doorway and entrance. Where Roseanne Boylan did, there was certainly very, very vicious fighting there. The police deployed chemical weapons, and Roseanne Boylan ended up, getting crushed or suffocating or having an overdose, depending on who you believe. So there is this, at different places, different things were happening, and so for it being gratuitous, it's kind of like, yeah, contrary to the narrative that some people put forward, the rioters were not well organized. It was more I always draw a blank on the word, but basically it's sort of like a swarm of bees when they're acting in a coordinated manner. It's not necessarily because there's like a central intelligence being like, this bee goes here, this bee goes there. It's that they're observing each other. They all have the same goal, and so they're working together to some extent. So it's, in a crowd you can see the same thing. The people are pushing close to the Capitol. So then when section of the police line retreats or breaks, you would see them flow in there like a crowd, not because they were necessarily following the instructions of one person or one group, but just because they wanted to get closer to the Capitol. So they see, oh, people are moving this way, I'll move that way as well.
Mm. So if people are interested, the Justice Department has put, I don't know if this is the entire file, but they've put stuff online about your case. You could go to justice.gov and find it. It says defendant file 1385731, or you can just type in Stephen Horn, FBI, justice.gov, and it's pretty easy to find. They have this Instagram post from New York Times Magazine where it says an individual notified the FBI that a photo on a New York Times Magazine social media page depicted Stephen Horn inside the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. The individual providing this information has known Horn for several years and was certain the person in the photo dressed in a black helmet, black jacket, black gloves, and a backpack was Horn. Also says you were standing above other people holding what appears to be a cell phone, and then goes on to say that a second individual who also knew Horn for several years, reported to the FBI that he or she saw the New York Times Magazine social media photo and was 95% sure the person circled above in the photo was Horn. The individual also stated the belief that Horn was inside the U.S. Capitol as a journalist, but was not aware of Horn having any media credentials. It goes on to talk about one of your posts where you say, I did not enter the Capitol building as part of the protest or for cheap thrills, but to accurately document and record a significant event which was taking place. So 2 questions. Number 1, any idea who contacted the FBI to let them know that's you in the photo? And also, it seems like, at least the information that I've read so far, you're saying on your post that you were not there for cheap thrills. You were there to document what was taking place. Another person saying they identify you as an independent journalist. However, at one point in the video, the voice consistent with Horn states with a raised voice, USA. So I don't know, can you just not say USA? I mean, even if you did say USA, did you yell USA? And does that mean, if you say USA, now you're not a journalist? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I
So
mean,
let's
if you
talk
can't
about
say
that a little
USA
bit.
in the Capitol, where can you say? But to answer your first question, I haven't really given much thought to who turned me in. Some of the members of my family think they know who it was. I don't really care, primarily because um the the facts that the the DOJ, or I guess this specifically the FBI, put forward there are a little misleading, because I had already reached out to the FBI myself days prior to that image even being posted or them receiving those tips. So I had reached out myself. I said, I took video here at the Capitol. I reached out both directly to the FBI and through the North Carolina Attorney General, because he was, making public statements that they're assisting the FBI or whatever. So for me, it's like, whatever, like, good for them. But I had already reached out to the FBI myself, which the FBI managed to not include in that charging document. Now, what was the second question? Oh yeah, the USA. So, like I was said, my strategy for staying safe was to blend in. And I guess for me, part of blending in is that you don't want to be the one person not chaining USA in sort of a highly dangerous, highly charged situation. So, when I recall, there weren't any police around. There wasn't anyone around then who would, come to my defense necessarily if, people decided that I was the enemy and I was attacked there. So, maybe that's where the Department of Justice wants to draw the line, but I think it's a little, I think it's in the best interests for journalists and for the public to have clarity on, well, this is where the Department of Justice draws the line. This is where they're going to draw the line for future events. I guess that's sort of my opinion on that.
Okay. There was a question on the locals live chat about Ray Epps and what you think about Ray Epps, since you were talking about, regarding the question when you were asking, like, let it happen on purpose. If you thought this was a case of that, because which I need to put in the screen, but the person on locals asked, does he think Ray Epps was stupidity too?
I mean, it's kind of hard to say.
Should we explain who Ray
Obviously,
Epps is for people who may not know?
yeah. So basically, Ray Epps is, someone from Arizona, previously, I believe, president of the Arizona Oath Keepers chapter. So he had sort of kind of a, militia background. On January 5th, the night before, he was out saying, let's go into the Capitol. He's on video saying that. On January 6th, you can see him whispering in the ears of some people, some of the first people to attack the police. It's disputed exactly what he told that person. I think Ray Epps says he told him to calm down or something. The person who he was talking to has given different reports of what Epps said in different interviews. But he is on video, I believe, on a megaphone later, sort of encouraging people to move towards the Capitol, sort of as the police are, as the people in the crowd are confronting the police on Capitol grounds. I believe there is video of him, going around sort of instigating, so to speak. And he also helped push a large metal sign into the police line. People are sort of lifting it over their heads, pushing it towards the police. And several people have been charged with assault with a deadly or dangerous weapon for helping push that sign into the police line. But Epps has, managed to become, I guess, someone who the media and the January 6th committee decided to defend instead of go after. So that has led a lot of people to suspect that, I guess, he was working for or with some sort of, basically, whoever was possibly orchestrating things behind the scenes, whether it was law enforcement or the intelligence community or whatnot, that, perhaps Epps was one of their agents or instigators.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the mainstream news has definitely done a lot of PR for squashing, I guess, what they're calling a conspiracy theory. Has never been an FBI source or an FBI employee. Again, going back to one of the
which is
questions.
like, okay, well, was he a contractor? Was he a contractor for a different? I mean, there's more federal departments than you can count. Okay, so maybe they're telling the truth and he wasn't an FBI source or employee, whatever the statement is. Does that mean he was not working for any government agency in any capacity? No, that's kind of a very narrow and specific statement. Um, so it's like, who knows? Who knows if they would tell the truth? It wouldn't be the first time that the government has lied to the American people. Probably won't be the last. And so, I haven't seen any definitive proof. People can point to sort of circumstantial evidence, like the fact that um, you know that he hasn't been arrested, and the media has gone to his defense. But that could also be, sort of a red herring on their point if they want to pick a particular person and say, oh, they're making conspiracy theories. Then people might see that as proof that they're correct. But it also could be that they picked someone who genuinely was just a personal provocateur instead of a government arranged provocateur. So
Mhm. I think it brings up a point that I at least have learned myself over the last few years of doing this work, just interviewing censored people with some of these very, very complicated and frankly, in a lot of cases, unknowable. Like when it, the the heart of what's going on in a lot of ways is unknowable. Like we will just be I don't know. I mean, you go back to 9/11, like, or farther, way farther back. But there are just certain things that you can say, I know with 90% certainty, but do you know for sure, for sure? And it's one of the reasons why, I've got cows and goats and horses now because I want to have a garden that I know where my food comes from because that's like one thing in my life I can actually know for sure. But if it's not outside my window, it's very difficult in today's world to know how you're being used or manipulated by all the different special interests, including the government, to perpetuate a particular cause. And even that feeling of righteous indignation, I think, often gets used to to make cases out of people where they think like I'm really participating in something. You're like, are you really participating in something, or are you actually feeding right into the exact narrative that the control mechanism that the powers that be would like you to do. I just think people should beware of feeling like, I don't know, that's in my opinion. I think January 6th was probably a lot of people who had very serious and I think fair questions about what's happening in the United States that were whose righteous indignation was tapped on for exactly what ended up happening. And I don't, I don't know who is orchestrating it all specifically. It just seems like it's just an opportunity to look back and say, like, do you really know who Ray Epps was or what he was doing? Like, I can't tell you for sure. And frankly, I'm not going to spend the rest of my life trying to figure it out. I would rather work on my garden. I don't know. That's just the way I look at it. I don't know about you, Stephen, but it's just, I just think that it's so easy to get trapped into some of this stuff. And are you ever going to get the answer? I just don't know. And I think it's
yeah,
more
I
worth
mean,
it.
maybe
Like,
20,
yeah,
30 years when they declassify some
right.
documents, and then maybe we'll get a little more insight.
Yeah. Yeah, once
I
you've
mean,
developed,
there's
like, Crohn's disease after worrying about all of this for 30 years, go plant a cucumber. Yeah, give me your last final closing thoughts and whatever
Yeah,
else you
I
wanna
mean, sort of to follow on that, there are a lot of undercover agents that we know were at the Capitol. There's video that came out of 3 Metropolitan Police officers who are kind of saying some provocative things. Not quite as strong as Ray Epps or some of the others, but they were saying like, move forward, get up or whatever. Um, and they are part of a unit that I believe had over 20 people in it called the Electronic Surveillance Unit under the Metropolitan Police that day. So we really don't know what the other, 20 some were doing besides the 3 that were on camera and recorded themselves doing this. So, there's a lot of questions. It would kind of stand to reason that there were no other departments that had undercover agents or officers in the crowd that, haven't come out yet. So it's like, what were they doing? Were they just observing? Were they trying to figure out what was going on, or were they instigating? And that's the question that won't necessarily be answered.
Well,
Um,
Steve,
but
you
I
know
think
what? You bring up a good point just to go back to what you were saying, how like there were other agents there. I think often the media taking the talking points from the government does that. Like they'll pick somebody who may very well not have been and is like fueling the conspiracy theory, and then they use that to debunk the concerns altogether. Like you're saying, well, okay, so maybe he wasn't, but that doesn't mean that that phenomenon didn't exist. And I do see that quite often, that tactic used. Like there's a person that they say, look, we have proof that this person was not with this, and then they try to put to rest the entire conspiracy theory when it's like, well, wait a second, were there valid concerns about all these other people? And that no, it's that's how they put it to rest. I do think that's a tactic that's used. And I think it's just something often too that gets just fed to the media by the government. That's just something I've noticed. And then to your other point, critical thought says if Epps is not working with the feds, he has a very active guardian angel. But also, did you observe any Fed-like behavior around you, i.e., the khaki pants group?
I mean, I didn't notice anyone where I was like, oh, that person looks like a Fed. But I also didn't necessarily know what to look for. I hadn't been doing independent journalism at events like this for that long, so I could very well have missed whatever telltale signs there might be. Because basically when I got there was sort of right as the sort of the police defense was collapsing. So maybe if I had been around earlier, when it was more static, I would have seen more of the people who were encouraging people, oh, we want to get into the Capitol, push forward or whatnot. But when I got there, I was sort of like, the dam had burst, and so people were just flowing past the police line, filling the upper terrace, starting to break into doors. So I guess, maybe I had sort of arrived after the main stirring people up period, I suppose, has sort of already passed.
Okay, Stephen. What would you like to say before you go? Where can people follow you? How should they support you if they want to stay in touch with you as the trial begins? Give me your last closing words.
Yeah, you can find me on locals, stephenhorn.locals.com. I've actually posted some articles exclusively there about January 6th. One specific, or I guess maybe one or two specifically, about some of the undercover Metropolitan Police officers and what we know about them and what we know that we did, not sort of guesses or supposition, but what is actually recorded on video and recorded in admissions by the government. So that's stephenhorn.locals.com. You can also find me on Twitter, Stephen E. Horn, or just look up Stephen Horn. And also, if you want to check out the documentary that I'll be releasing soon, you can find that at J6 Documentary on most social media platforms. And you can follow us on any of those for updates.
Okay. All right, Stephen. Well, I'll have my extremist altitude wine on September 12th, which is my birthday, and then I will be tuning in on September 13th to figure out how are we going to be able to see how the trial goes? I mean, are they going to federal court journalists were never allowed to bring cameras when I was in the business, but I don't. How will the word get out? I guess about how it's going. How can we cover
Yeah,
it?
we'll see. I guess I don't know if any journalists will be there covering it. If not, maybe I'll come on and let you know what's happening.
Oh, please do. Yeah, I would love to have. Yeah, let's
Yeah,
let's let's
we'll
let's
see.
make it in.
I don't have any fixed plans, and I don't know if any other journalists will be up there.
What's the worst case scenario?
I think the worst case scenario would be like a year in jail.
Are you scared?
I probably should be, but I'm not.
And why don't you think you're not?
Just built different.
What's your gut tell you about what do you think's gonna happen?
Um, well, I'm sort of I'm a realist, so maybe even a pessimist. You see, my philosophy is that if I expect things to go the worst that could possibly happen, then I'll never be disappointed. So I sort of
Mm.
expect to, lose a child, go to prison for a year. So if it ends up being better than that, I'll be happily surprised.
Have you ever gone to jail or prison before?
No, they did lock me up for a couple hours when they arrested me, even though I turned myself in. But I know some people who have been to prison, so I can get some good tips.
Oh God. Well,
Maybe
maybe
some
I
good
don't.
recipes for prison food.
Um, well, I don't know if you could do interviews from federal prison, but
I don't know if you're supposed to be able to do, but I have talked, I have interviewed people or had conversations with people who are, locked up in jail.
I have asked for that lieutenant colonel. His last name's Brock. I've asked for an interview with him. He's currently on a hunger strike. I think he might die. I think he might be committing suicide by hunger because he says he's trying to draw attention to this cause. Um,
Is this one of the January 6th defendants?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I'm not sure I'm familiar with him.
Let me pull it up real fast and I'll show you. Yeah, because he had like zip ties in his hand or something. And let's see here.
Was he the one who entered with his mother,
Ugh,
or is
that I
that
don't
someone
know.
different?
I don't think so. I don't think
Okay,
that's
yeah, I think
him.
there might have been a couple of people with zip ties.
Okay, this is. Hang on. I'm trying to find where they talk about the hunger strike. Of course, all the articles I'm finding right now are just basically making him look like a terrible person. Okay, here we go. Trending politics now. Of course, like no mainstream media has it, but or at least I'm not seeing it. It says, can you see it here? January 6th prisoner has lost 30
Yes.
pounds since going on. Okay, and this was June 18th. So yeah, Larry Brock Jr., a retired Air Force lieutenant colonel who was sentenced to 2 years in prison for walking around inside the Capitol building on January 6th, has shed 30 pounds since starting a hunger strike. Okay, so that's according to the Epoch Times. Quote, I've always believed in the American people. I still do. So you need to understand that I cannot accept the decision of this court is the action of a hostile and illegitimate regime against an American patriot. He said in an emotional video statement, which, I haven't seen the video. But I'm surprised how he's getting videos out. Anyway, yeah,
Yeah, well, here's the thing. When you're
I
in
have asked for an
prison, you're
interview.
not supposed to have a cell phone. That doesn't mean lots of prisoners don't have cell phones. Prisoners also get lots of drugs, even though technically they're not supposed to get drugs either. So,
Mm.
my understanding is that there is a very active smuggling system in most, if not all, US prisons. So it's not too shocking that, the defendants are able to get cell phones and, now cell phone can take video, not just audio. So it doesn't really shock me that some prisoners have been able to record videos and get them out there.
One statement I want to just throw at you. He knows even a real journalist, questionable in his case, can't trespass. Right? I think. Well, first off, I all these questions about how trespassing. But anyway, I mean, at the heart of this is a lot of journalists were allowed to be there and have not faced any charges. So really, it's a question of like, why Stephen? I don't know if you want to respond to that, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, if they had decided, hey, we're going to, treat all journalists who enter the Capitol equally, and so we're going to charge them all, I think that would be a different conversation we would be having in terms of, okay, is that a good idea? Is that really in the interest of justice and the American people to say that, no journalists should have been covering what happened inside the Capitol? Ashley Babbitt, she was shot. Would we ever have seen video of that if there were no journalists there? Other instances that happened inside the Capitol, sort of the interaction between the oath keepers and Officer Dunn, when he had one story of what happened, which was not true, and they had a different story, which was much closer to the truth. Um, Stuff like that. If you're saying everything that happened inside the Capitol, there's no interest to the American people in knowing any of the details of what went on. If you've seen how much of a fight it's been to get that the security cameras and stuff like that, I think that would be a very tenuous argument to make that this was not in the interests of the people to know, to have reporting and publishing on what went inside, what was happening inside the Capitol with this whole group of rioters. There weren't like police standing there where you could be like, "Hey, I'm a member of the press. Is it okay for me to go inside?" Like that wasn't what the situation was.
A critical thought. Best of luck to Steven. I hope he has very good counsel. I forgot to ask you about that. How's your lawyer thinking through all this? I mean, and how do you feel? Do you feel confident in representation? And what does this person think about your chances related to the bias in the judicial system? I mean, I think that's one of the things that I see over and over again with people I interview, regardless of topic, is that it seems the judicial system is really stacked against the Constitution right now. So, if it's something where you're trying to be innocent until proven guilty, it seems like in the United States, depending on who you are and what the crime is, you are guilty until proven innocent.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of my legal representation, I'm paying for a private lawyer, so I'm happy. If I wasn't happy, I would have a different lawyer, I guess. So, I think this is sort of a case that, I think that the headline of that article, referred to it as like a landmark press case. I'm not sure I'd refer to it as such, but I think it's it is sort of unique, in that generally the Justice Department doesn't bring this sort of cases. Even local DAs in whatever states don't bring this sort of case. So I think my lawyer doesn't necessarily have so much experience with this particular type of case, but I'm not sure there is any lawyer that really does, because it's sort of a unique case.
Hmm.
Generally, they do end up deferring to the First Amendment, maybe even interpreting it a little too broadly at times to either not arrest journalists or drop the charges, because,
Hmm.
there is this competing interest of justice and of newsworthiness and of having the American people informed and being able to know what was happening at, critical and confusing and complex events where, the police might tend to have some justification to arrest a journalist as part of a crowd. Those are some of the same events where it's most in the interests of the American people to know what was happening without it being filtered through the lens of, oh, these are the little droplets of information that the police are willing to release themselves.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting. Definitely going to be um, very interested to hear what happens with their case against you and what comes out, and just see what happens. But Stephen, thanks again for taking the time, and thanks everybody for watching. You can go see Steven's documentary. You can check out him on Twitter, or scroll back a few minutes. He'll tell you again. If you're watching this video, just tuned in, he said everywhere you can go find him. So there's plenty to do if you want to keep up with Steven. Just a few months away, he's going to head to court, and we're going to see what happens. And Steven, I appreciate your willingness to talk about it all. I know it's not necessarily a topic that makes you any friends. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.